You've never been on a real mission in your life, desk jockey, the contractor barked, stepping right into my personal space. The entire holding room fell completely silent. Dozens of elite operators, contractors, and agency personnel turned around to watch. I just stood there in my plain civilian clothes, holding a battered leather folder, looking like the softest guy in the room. He thought he was putting a bean counter in his place. What he didn't realize was that every single medal, classification level, and operational record on his resume passed through my desk before he was even allowed in the building. And the room was about to find out exactly who I was. If you're new here, subscribe, I post a new story every day. Okay, so to understand how a guy in a Target brand polo ended up in a forward transit holding facility being screamed at by a 6'4" PMC, we have to backtrack a bit. I've worked in intelligence operations for over 15 years. I don't wear a uniform anymore. I don't carry a primary weapon system. My job title officially sounds like a mid-level bureaucrat, but in reality, I run operational oversight and high-value asset clearance for joint task forces. Basically, if a high-tier operation goes down, I'm one of the guys who approves the green light and verifies every single operator's clearance credentials. Because of the nature of my work, I deliberately keep a low profile. I wear off-the-rack clothes, I keep my hair practical, and I never flex operational history. Which brings us to last month in a joint transit holding room, often called the hold room, in an undisclosed staging area. Everyone in that room was waiting for final mission briefings and clearance manifests. Enter dynamic personality number 1, let's call him Miller. Miller was a private military contractor who loved letting everyone know he was the baddest guy in the room. He was loud, obnoxious, and spent the entire morning loudly critiquing everyone else's gear, posture, and deployment history. Now here's where I'd have lost it, honestly. Listening to a guy boast about his service record while everyone else is trying to focus is painful. Miller noticed me sitting in the corner, quietly reviewing paper manifests and cross-referencing files on an encrypted tablet. Because I wasn't wearing tactical gear and didn't have a unit patch on my sleeve, Miller instantly pegged me as easy prey. He walked over, threw his heavy rucksack onto the bench right next to my paperwork, and grunted. "You're in the way, clipboard," Miller said, loud enough for the guys nearby to hear. I didn't lose my temper. I just calmly slid my papers out from under his bag and said, "There's plenty of bench space, mate. Just keep it on your side." Big mistake trying to be reasonable with a guy like Miller. He scoffed, looked around at his buddies, and sneered. "Look at this guy, who brought the accountant into a staging area." I'll be honest, I didn't expect him to keep pushing it. Usually, guys get the hint when you don't engage. Instead, Miller doubled down. He leaned over my shoulder, pointing at my tablet. "You sitting here looking at operational charts like you know what happens out there," he sneered. "You've never been on a real mission in your life, desk jockey. You wouldn't last 10 minutes past the wire." The entire hold room went dead quiet. You could feel the tension instantly ratchet up. Would you have snapped right there? Let me know below, because staying calm took every ounce of discipline I had. I slowly locked the tablet screen, placed it flat on the folder, and looked up at him. "Is your name Miller?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat. He smirked, throwing his shoulders back. "Yeah, contractor lead Miller. Former special operations. Actual combat experience. Not that someone like you would understand." "Right," I said smoothly. "Well, contractor lead Miller, the reason I'm looking at these manifests is because your team's deployment clearance hasn't been signed off yet." Miller laughed out loud. "Signed off? By who? Some pen pusher back at HQ?" Right at that exact second, the heavy steel door to the hold room slammed open. In walked Colonel Vance, the Joint Task Force commander for the entire sector, flanked by 2 senior Tier 1 team leads. Everyone in the room snapped to attention, except Miller, who was still smirking at me, and me, sitting calmly on the bench. Colonel Vance swept his eyes across the room, ignoring the dozen guys saluting him, and walked straight toward my corner. Miller, thinking the colonel was coming to address his detachment, straightened his posture and took a step forward. "Colonel, team is locked and loaded, just waiting on final transit," Miller announced proudly. Colonel Vance didn't even look at Miller. He stepped right past him, walked up to my bench, and stood at rigid attention. "Sir," Colonel Vance said to me, his voice echoing in the silent room. "The task force briefing room is prepped. We're waiting on your sign-off to initiate the operational window." Wait, read that part again in your head, because the look on Miller's face was worth $1 million. Miller's jaw literally dropped. His eyes went wide as saucers as he glanced back and forth between the JTF commander and me, the guy he just called a desk jockey. The other operators in the room, who knew exactly what the commander calling someone, "sir," in civilian clothes meant, suddenly held their breath. I stood up slowly, picked up my leather folder, and looked at Colonel Vance. "Thank you, Colonel. We have a small administrative hold-up first." I turned my gaze directly to Miller, who looked like he had just swallowed a brick. Contractor Miller here was expressing concerns about my operational understanding, I said, my voice cutting through the room. He felt my background made me unfit to review his team's clearance manifests. Colonel Vance turned a cold, terrifying glare onto Miller. "Is that right?" Vance asked, his voice dripping with ice. Miller stammered, his face turning bright red. Sir, I didn't realize. I was just." "You were making assumptions based on a lack of uniform," I interrupted calmly. I opened my folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper with red classification borders, and handed it to Colonel Vance. "Colonel, during my review of Contractor Miller's unit logs, I noted 3 major protocol breaches during their last staging exercise. Given his vocal disregard for operational oversight, I am officially withholding my authorization for his unit's participation in this cycle." The room gasped. Withholding authorization meant Miller's entire team was grounded, losing a massive contract and facing immediate peer audit. Miller looked like he was about to faint. "Sir, please, it was just talk. You don't talk to Director Vance's senior intelligence liaison like that in my staging area," Colonel Vance growled at Miller. "Hand over your credentials. Your unit is stepping down immediately." Miller slowly reached up, unclipped his transit badge, and handed it over, completely destroyed in front of 50 fellow operators. As Colonel Vance escorting me out of the hold room toward the brief, I paused near the door, looked back at Miller, and said softly, "Next time you decide who has combat experience, remember that the quietest person in the room is usually the one who decides if you get to go home." The payoff wasn't just watching a bully lose his leverage, it was watching an entire room realize that real authority doesn't need to shout, wear gear, or flex for attention. People who constantly project power are usually the ones terrified of being exposed. True authority carries itself with quiet confidence, and it never needs to prove a point until it's time to close the folder. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have pulled his clearance on the spot, or given him a warning? Drop your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe. I post brand new stories every single day, and you won't want to miss tomorrow's. Thanks for listening.